For me, the best feedback is that someone will say to me, I read your book and there was so much that resonated for me. So why did I make this public? It was, I was really very vulnerable because I do speak my truth and I say a lot of things that, are not so easy. We're not easy to put out there. But I did it for two reasons. I did it, one, because I want people to understand the value of journaling.
Hi friends, this is Read and Write with Natasha podcast. My name is Natasha Tynes and I'm an author and a journalist. In this channel, I talk about the writing life, review books, and interview authors. Hope you enjoy the journey. Hi everyone and welcome to another episode of Read and Write with Natasha. Today I have with me Merle Saferstein, who's an educator, speaker, and an author. Since 1974, she has amassed a collection of 380 journals. The majority of these journals are the basis of her legacy journal, Living and Leaving My Legacy, Volume 1, which was released in June 2022. The book, as you can see here, is divided into 11 topics, including journaling, marriage, parenting, career, spirituality, and more. So, Merle, so happy to have you here. I'm so excited to have you as part of my show. And I love journaling personally, and I'll tell you more about it, but we're here to hear from you. So without further ado, Merle, can you please tell us a bit about your legacy journal, Living and Leaving My Legacy? What is it exactly, and why did you decide to collect all of your personal anecdotes, very private, in this public format?
First of all, thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here. When I started keeping my journals, I knew I was keeping them for myself, but early on I thought that perhaps someday I would leave them for my children. And as I wrote during the years, I realized at some point that really I was writing for myself and that there was a lot in my journals that I was not willing to share with anyone, and especially my children. And so that led me down the path of what will I do with my journals. And at some point, I guess it was around 2000, I started really looking at the fact that I was not going to leave them to my children. That's when I knew that I had to do something. And I also knew as an educator that while I wasn't sure, I felt that I had to have had something in these journals that was worth sharing. And I also knew that there were things I wanted to be able to pass down to my children. In 2002, I began to read my journals for the first time and see what was there, see if I had anything really to share. I divided my life into originally 40 topics, but it ended up being 70 different topics, which was really crazy. It took me 14 years to go through. At the time, it was 359 journals. And what I did was I would read each journal. I would tab them to indicate what the topic was that I wanted to put them under. And then I would, when I finished a journal, I would have all these Post-it notes on the side of my journal. And I would go through and type them into the computer under the different topics. So that was a 14-year process. And then it took me 5 years to whittle those down. So, for example, one topic might have had 75 pages of just excerpts from my journals. Another one, I think the one on marriage had 450 pages. The one on parenting had probably close to the same number, which meant that in order to share them, I had to whittle it down to approximately 30 pages of excerpts. So that took 5 years to do. And then, at that point, I had decided that I was going to do around 11 topics in each book. And so there are 2 volumes. And so the very last year was just a year of editing. Once I had decided on the topics for volume 1, I just spent a lot of time editing, whittling them down to a book that's really large, not a typical book that fits on a shelf. But I was really excited when I was finished because I felt like it was really a representative of a lot of my life more my earlier years. And while some of the excerpts take place from 1974 to 2016, they really reflect some of the things that I've done earlier in my career. And the second volume has things that are more applicable to the years after I retired from my job at the Holocaust Center.
So, of course, the question is, did your children read the book? And what did they think of it?
Great question. Okay, so the first thing that I did before I put it out to anyone was I sent my kids I have two children, Rebecca, who's now 51, and Michael, who is just about to turn 50. And I sent them the chapter on parenting before anyone else saw it. And I said, I need to know if you are comfortable with what I've written. So Michael called after reading about 3 pages, and he said, Mom, who is Stella? And I said, no, Michael, there's no Stella. He said, I've spent the last half hour trying to figure out who Stella is. So there in the book, I mostly use people's names as they were. But for example, if there was something a story that I wanted to tell, but I did not want to expose the person, I would make up a name. So that was Stella.
Okay.
Michael had he said, I'm totally fine with everything you've written. He had no problem. Rebecca, my daughter, called and said, I just want to ask you a question. She said, well, first, one thing she said was, there are certain things a child should never have to read. And she was referring to, the times I would talk about making love or whatever. And we laughed about that, and she was really fine. She was really joking around. But the one thing that she really was asking about was whether I had ever written anything in the journal anywhere else about her having been sexually abused when she was a child. And I said, no, that was not my story to tell. And she said, I think you should. And I was shocked because she had been abused when she was from the ages of 10 through 11. And we didn't even know about it till she was 18 years old, went away to college, went to a therapist to talk about it. And the therapist suggested that she, since it was 3 days before her 18th birthday, that she had to report it to the Division of, Family and Children. And so then she came home and told us, because they told her she had 3 days. It was not something, I certainly wrote in a journal about it. I wrote a lot through the years, but never thinking that I would ever expose it. Rebecca said, I think it's important because we hear from someone who's been abused, but we almost never hear from a parent. And I really do think that this might be helpful to someone else. So I went back and took out that journal from when she first told us. I put in excerpts, and then I shared them with her. She was totally fine with it. And then in the reflection, so after each chapter, I have both reflections on what I read as I went back and read about them and how I felt, and sometimes catching up from 2016 until present day. And so in that reflections on parenting, I wrote about how Rebecca had asked me to do that, because I wouldn't want a reader to think that I just glibly wrote about my child's experience without her. And I think, very well could have, but it was important to me. And for me, it showed the tremendous growth that Rebecca's made in all these years. And I was really touched by the fact that she would want that. So yes, I do not know if my sons read the whole book. My daughter absolutely read the whole book, commented, called me and said, in a few situations said, I think that maybe you don't need to say that, or are you sure you really want to put that in there, or I love this. So we had a constant dialogue while she was reading it. And my son, I don't know. I don't know if my daughter-in-law's read it, my granddaughters, but they've got it. And hopefully if they haven't, they will someday.
Do you think reading their journal helped them? Understand you, understand life, forgive things that, if they held any grudges. How did it change them reading this massive journal?
I think for Rebecca, reading the whole book, I think it brought us closer. We've had some incredible conversations about some of the topics and some of the things that I wrote in there. has asked me questions about some of it, her recollection of things that was very different than when I wrote. And so we would talk about that. In terms of parenting, Michael called and said, I wish I would have listened to you, because when he became a parent, all of a sudden things were very different. He was looking at things in a different way. As an educator, there were lots of times I really wanted to say, Michael, there's another way to do this, but I didn't, because unless I was asked, I didn't give that advice. So we joked about that. But I think that for him, I think it gave him some insight into who I was as a mother when he was younger and who I am now, and also my relationship with his daughters, which has been very important for him to see, who I've been to them.
Yeah, and your daughter. I mean, I'm really sorry about what you went through and what you went through as a mom. Is reading about that experience from your perspective helped her heal? You think?
I don't. She joined a support group early on, and also went to a therapist. And I think that all of that has helped her. I think that early on, I shared my journal excerpts with her, so she had seen them many years ago. I think the conversation has been easier as a result of her having put this in the book. I actually was interviewed by someone who has a podcast called Overcoming Child Sexual Abuse. And the woman really just interviewed me because she wanted to help people journal and felt that I might be able to, give some tips and whatever. But as a result of that, I've gotten involved in the task force on childhood sexual abuse. And Rebecca and I have had a lot of conversations. So I think it's made a big difference in a lot of ways. Just to say that I was an elementary school teacher. I directed a camp with 350 kids. I directed a preschool. I never even thought about childhood sexual abuse. It was not anything that was ever discussed in my world until 1984, when one of our state representatives in Florida came out and talked about having been sexually abused. At that point in my journal, I wrote and said, I can't even imagine that this would have happened to anyone I knew. And at the time, it was probably right around the time it was happening to my own child without my knowing it.
Wow.
So it was a rude awakening. And of course, things changed drastically once that came out into society and people began to talk about it. And, teachers and educators and all of us knew that things had to be done very differently.
Wow. So I'm going to shift gears a bit, and I want to ask about the process of journaling. So you started journaling when you were 13, you said, around 13 years old?
Well, I started originally when I was a young teenager in middle school, junior high school, we called it.
Okay.
I wrote probably through high school.
Okay.
And then for whatever reason, I stopped. I lost those journals. My mother said that when they moved, she told me to come get them, and I never did, which I don't understand, because I still have my autograph books from elementary school, so I can't imagine that I wouldn't have gotten my journals. I started again on my 30th birthday, when I had 2 young children, and I had taken a course, and I had this half-empty stenographer's pad. And I said, no, I'm just going to write down what I'm feeling today on my birthday. And then I never stopped.
Okay. So when you started, when you were a teenager, you started, I guess, using a pen and a paper. Is that how you started? And then later on, you used a computer, or
no, never. Trusty fountain pen. I use a fountain pen. I write in regular journals. I'm very fussy about the kind of journals I use.
Okay.
I only like thin lines. If a journal has thick lines, like wide space, I don't like those.
Okay.
I used to love writing in unlined journals until I started doing this journal project.
Okay.
And what I realized when I was doing a journal, for example, that was unlined, I wrote so much smaller that
Okay.
one journal was equivalent to probably 3 other journals. And I said, I'm never doing that again. That was just like too
Okay.
much. Um, but I'm really particular. I also did morning pages. I know. Are you familiar with morning
Yeah,
pages?
Alice Lamont. Yeah. 3 pages every, like the brain dump, right? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so those I did in college lined notebooks. And I have about 30 of those morning page journals, which I realized when I went through and read them, they really are different. The morning pages, when you write, right when you get up in the morning, are more from the unconscious. And it was more of a stream of consciousness than my regular journals were. But I had to combine those, as I was doing this
Ah.
project, because they would overlap the journals that I was writing in the rest of the day.
So what's the difference? I mean, for anyone who's listening and or watching, or for me as well, because I'm a bit confused between like journaling and morning pages. Like I journal, I try to be consistent. I journal sometimes at night, sometimes in the morning. But what is the difference? Actually, I'm going to show you my journal so we could talk about what kind of books you use, because I like to geek out on stationery and stuff. But let's talk about the difference.
Okay. So to me, I think the difference is that when morning pages traditionally from the Artist's Way, Julia Cameron suggests that you get up and before you do anything else, you sit down and write. And the reason she says that is because when you write that way, you're writing really out of your unconscious. You're just you've just left that dream state and then you start writing. And it's a real flow of consciousness. It's just you just put it down. You're going to write for 3 pages. There's no agenda. You just do it. Journaling. So there's a difference between journaling and keeping a diary, I think. And keeping a diary is, when you write, today I went to the store and I did this and I did that. I think that my journals very often are like, I actually journal when I get up in the morning. I don't call them morning pages and I don't necessarily stick to 3. Sometimes I write 6 pages and sometimes I write 1 page. But I think that it's that too, depending on how you are. I mean, some people can only journal to a prompt. They need a prompt to write. Some people can just put their pen down and start writing. And some people have no idea where to start. So I always say, if you don't know where to start, then start with right now I feel, or right now I am, and then just let your pen go. I started a journaling circle in April of 2020 with COVID, and we've been journaling together for we just had our 3rd anniversary last Sunday. Most of the women, so there are 15 women now, there were more, but eventually some dropped out. But of those women, only a few ever journaled, and now they're all regular journalers. If not every day, at least every Sunday, but more than that.
So the difference between keeping a journal and keeping a diary, like sometimes I feel these two things mesh. Like sometimes I would say, today was a great day. Like I spent it with friends and this made me feel blah, blah, blah. Isn't that like kind of a marriage between both
Yes.
or?
Yes. And I do the same thing, Natasha. I
Okay.
do. But some people just record their day, what they did, not feelings, not thoughts. I think a journal is more talking about how you feel, writing about how you feel, what you're thinking, what you're feeling, not necessarily what you've done. I do both. Obviously you do too. And I don't think it matters. And in my book, I mean, it's a combination. You can see, sometimes I'm recording just what I did that day. And then sometimes it's deeper in what I'm thinking.
Yeah, like the concept of Dear Diary, when you start whatever Dear Diary, even the concept of Dear Diary, you're telling the diary your thoughts. I mean, I think that's the whole point of it. So that's fascinating. So like I would like to hear about the books that you use. So my experience with journaling, I I had like a bit of an awakening. I discovered my own journal when I was 13. I mean, I knew I kept it, and it was like in the 80s when I had my first one. And I grew up in the Middle East, and like the stuff that I went through back then and now, and like like. And like the journal would end with, "This was the worst day of my life." And it was like the worst day of my life because I had like a fight with a friend or something like really minor. And like when you, it's like time travel. Like I went back in time to the head of my 13-year-old self, and it was just mind blowing. And I read it to my daughter, and we both laughed. And so for me, like, now I'm a huge fan of journaling. So, which takes me to the question, is enough about me, is what do you use? So now, when I was 13, I don't know what I used back in Jordan, whatever notebook I found. But now I'm trying to get fancy, and many, let's say, bloggers, they use this like German journal book called, I don't know how to pronounce it, Luchterum, and they sell it at Barnes and Noble. I don't know if you know how to pronounce it, but it's everywhere, and like they all swear by it. So let's just geek out on notebooks and stationery. So what do you use?
You want me to show you? I can get it really quickly.
Sure, yeah.
It's right here. And I have a certain fountain pen. I have 3 fountain pens I use for different purposes.
Okay.
So one always sits in my journal.
Okay.
So this is a journal. This is Blue Sky.
Okay.
And I started this journal November 21st, 2022. Do you date your journals?
Yes, of course.
Yeah,
I have to.
That's the only rule I always tell everyone.
Yeah,
you can do
of course.
anything you want. So here's what my journals look like.
Okay. Oh, I see. Okay.
And I've got all this written since November. That's a lot.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I'm halfway. I literally just met the halfway mark yesterday. So I still.
Do you still journal every day?
Every day. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, once in a while I don't. But one of the things that I realized that happened for me was when I worked on this project, I realized that there were certain things I really did not need to journal about anymore. It was just, I'm more inclined now to really write when I'm thinking and feeling the real deep stuff. To sort out my thoughts and feelings rather than just, I don't know. It's almost like no small talk in here anymore. It's more really significant. And there are times that I absolutely know I need to sit down and write. There are times that I'm much more willing to not write and wait until the moment that I have to. And sometimes I'll wake up in the middle of the night and lay there for maybe 10 minutes. And if I can't go back to sleep, I say, okay, I know I need to write. And I will, in the middle of the night, sometimes write like from 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock, just write. And it's amazing what comes out in the middle of the night, just, that I'm just putting down on paper.
So how did you think journaling changed you as a person? How did it change your life? Yeah.
I'll tell you. So in 1986, I went to a therapist for a very short time. I just had an issue I needed to work on. This woman said to me, and so in 86, I don't know how many journals, maybe I had 40, 50 journals, I have no idea. She said to me at the end of my 8 sessions that I saw her, she said, I have never met anyone who knows herself as well as you do. And she said, I am sure it's because you journal.
Huh.
And I believe that's true. I really know who I am. I'm very clear. And I also think that another way it's changed me is that I live in the present. I'm very conscious of living in the present as a result. It's changed me because I've had the opportunity to look back at my life and see how I've grown and understand that growth. Just see through the years the things that have changed. And I think that when I have a problem, it's the first place I go to sit down and sort it out. And that's very helpful for me. Sometimes in my journal, I will do one of two things. I will write a letter an unsent letter to someone to work through an issue, or I will do a dialogue with that person. So a dialogue is I put my initials, I write what I want to say, I put that person's initials, that person answers, and it's really interesting. I mean, I'm writing for someone else, but very often that person's voice comes right down on the paper. And I can resolve issues that way without ever having to go to the person, and just understand. And an unsent letter, sometimes I'll write more than one of them and realize that I'm sorting through and getting to the thing I really need to say, getting rid of the emotion, and just, this is the issue that we need to work on.
Fascinating.
So journaling, I've done, recently, I did journaling for self-care for a group of, it was for a national hospice organization for nurses, social workers, and music therapists. They were doing a year-long program of study on trauma. And I was asked to work with them, not on trauma, but on helping them to deal with the trauma that they're dealing with in what they're learning. So I was asked to help them have the tools so that they could do the self-care. So I am a firm believer that journaling for self-care is really important and makes a huge difference.
Yeah. So you think everyone should journal?
I do. I know everyone won't. I know everyone doesn't. Not even close, but I do. I mean, I truly think it's a gift we give ourselves. Also, one of the things when I was going through my journals, I came across so many things that, events and happenings and conversations with friends and family. And I would take those excerpts and send them to them. So I'm noted as the family historian, the friend historian. One of my friends said, "You have a record of my life that I don't have," and so it's also being able to. We think we're going to remember something, but I want to tell you that I know that my memory is so much better because I write things down.
Okay, let's talk about the elevator pitch. You're in an elevator with someone and they ask you, do you think I should journal? Why? And what would be your elevator pitch?
I think you should journal because when you do, you will find that you have given yourself a huge gift. You will be able to sort out what you're thinking and feeling. It's great for your mental health, and I think that, I don't know what else I'd say.
That's good enough.
I can go on for an hour, but in an elevator, I'm not so sure. But I'm such a firm believer that really journaling is such a gift we give ourselves.
Okay. And you would only recommend paper and pen? Because there's another, there's an app called, right, I think, Day One Journal, and I've dabbled with it, and I mix with both. Like I like to write down like morning pages and stuff, but sometimes I'm like waiting on the doctor or something. I just pull out the app and just write, and I go back to it, and it's on my phone, and you can protect it with a password so no one can mess with it. So what do you think of like only digital or a hybrid method?
For me personally, I'm happiest when I'm writing with my pen.
Okay.
On paper. I do think that there's something psychologically when we go from our brain down our arm, through the hand, through the pen, onto the page. I've had conversations with several psychologists who really agree with me in that. However, there are a lot of people I know who journal on the computer, on their phone, and are very happy and satisfied and feel as though this is, for them, this is their best way to do it. Mm-hmm. And I say it doesn't matter as long as you do it. My feeling is this: we are so much better off if our house is messy and there's stuff all over. Our brains are cluttered. We cannot think the same way as, I know before a project, I just need to clear my space completely.
Yeah.
I think I think that it's the same with our minds and journaling. I think that when we get things out of our heads onto paper, it's a release in a way. And it's an uncluttering in a way that I don't think there's, maybe talking to someone, if you have a therapist, you talk to the therapist every day. But I do believe that it's really important. And so I don't care how you do it, whether you type it, whether you speak. I mean, there's a woman in our journaling circle. I see her. We work on Zoom, and everyone's on mute when they're writing, and she's talking. She's talking into an app that will translate and type it out.
Yeah.
So some are typing on their computer, some are handwriting, some are talking. Doesn't matter. Just do it.
Fascinating.
As Nike would say.
Yeah.
It's Nike.
Yeah. And okay, so you published the book last year. What was the reaction? So as an author myself, I'm familiar with both the positive and the negative feedback. I hope you didn't get any negative, but that's kind of part of the gig. So I'm just curious to hear both the positive and the negative, if you got any.
Sure. I was really very fortunate in knowing that before I put this book out there, that this is not a book for everyone. A lot of people are like one particular genre. This is all in journal form. So for some people, that would be really difficult to read. The other thing is it's a big book.
Okay.
And the negative, and I don't even consider it negative, but what I found is that there are people who have said to me, I needed to skip around. I went to the topic that interested me the most, and that's what I read first.
Yeah, that's what I did, yeah.
Right. And the truth is, it doesn't matter because each topic sits totally by itself.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them go from 1974 to 2016. Some of them are just, one particular period in my life, and so it's just that. One woman told me that she, every single day, picks up the journal and reads one page. Just randomly reads it. She said, and regardless of what it is, there's always something that leaves me with food for thought. There are some people, I just had someone who did an early read for my second volume that's coming out this June. And she's a psychologist. And she said to me, your book has changed my life.
Oh, wow.
And that was really amazing. And she's not the first one who said it. For one, when I asked her, if she'd tell me more, one of the things she said is that she's journaling every day now as a result. She never journaled before. But she talked about just the growth and seeing where I was and where I've come from and what she learned from it. It was just very exciting to hear that. So I would say that for me, the best feedback is that someone will say to me, I read your book and there was so much that resonated for me. So why did I make this public? It was, I was really very vulnerable because I do speak my truth and I say a lot of things that, are not so easy. We're not easy to put out there. But I did it for two reasons. I did it, one, because I want people to understand the value of journaling. But the second and even more important reason is that it's not that I want people to read about my life, but I want them to read about my life so that it can be a mirror into their own lives. Because there's so much that's universal, regardless of what religion we are, what race we are, where we're born, how old we are. There's certain things about just being human that resonate with one another. And so if nothing else, what I want, and the most important feedback for me is when I hear someone say that to me, that I read your book and it really made me think about where I was at that point in my life or how I feel about a particular situation. Kathleen Adams, who is one of the journal writing gurus, she's a journal therapist, but she started journal therapy a long, long time ago, teaching it, and she has an institute. She wrote the foreword for the first book. And Kay said that when she was reading it, there were so many times that she would go back into her journals of the same date to see where she was in her life at that point. And And so I thought that was really interesting too. But really, above all else, what I care most about is that people look at their own lives. So I'm a legacy educator, and my feeling is that how we live our life becomes our legacy. And I think that when we can go back and look at our lives and reflect the way some people will and do when they read the book, I think it's hopefully going to lead them to lead a better life. And that's some of the feedback that I've gotten, that I now looking at life differently than I did before.
Fascinating. I'm so happy to hear it. Let's say somebody comes to you, says, I've never journaled before, a very busy mom, work full-time job, I have 5 kids, I want to start journaling, and what kind of tools I need to get, and how to create the habit, and how to stick with the habit. What would you tell them?
I would say that I would prefer them get some kind of journal, notebook, or paper, anything.
Okay.
I would suggest writing by hand. I would say that I understand you're busy, and I understand that you have 5 kids and your life is full, but it would be worth it to get up 15 minutes earlier than you normally do to start writing each day. Just do that. There was a period in the 80s when I was working one job, in the 90s 2 jobs, and sometimes even 3 jobs, and had children and a husband and a lot going on. My parents were here. There was a lot happening, and I always found time to write. So I'm someone who believes that if you want to do something, you do it. You just make the time. So I would encourage someone to look at it as a gift that they're giving themselves, as I've said before, and make the time, find the time, either early in the morning, at bedtime, at lunchtime, on your lunch hour. Many times I would write on my lunch hour. I would write, actually stopped at a railroad crossing when the train was going by. I would write in line at the grocery store. I always kept a journal with me for many, many, many years, and wrote in any given moment that I could, in the doctor's office, whenever. So that would be mine.
So you always carry a journal. So how do you
I don't anymore, because now I just have it on my phone, and if I need to say something, I write it down in the notes on my phone, and then just remember and go home and write about it.
I see. So how would they stick with the habit? Because some people really get excited about something new, and me included, of course. And then, after a week or so, we just drop doing it and we forget about it. So how do you think people can stick with the habit?
I would suggest that someone make the promise to themselves to journal for a month. Just whatever you do, just commit to doing it for 1 month. And then after that, you can decide. What I've found in all the journaling workshops I've done and taught, and all the people I've talked to about journaling, is that most people often write when they are unhappy. And then when things kind of calm down or the situation settles down, they stop writing. So I've heard so many people say, I have 20 journals that are written, I've written a third, I've written a half, and then I stop. That's what a lot of people do. And I say, okay, if that's what you have to do, fine. I mean, I think it's great to write the good and the bad. Not everyone does. And some people can't stick to anything. So I can only encourage them at least to try it for a month. Just make a commitment for 1 month and then see.
Yeah. It's like praying, most of us just pray when we're going through a rough time, and when we're happy, we forget about God and praying, and, so it's interesting. True. Yeah, it's a negativity bias, I guess. So before we conclude, any final thoughts on, your journey, the journaling journey, any final tips, anything you'd like to share with the audience?
I think that one of the best things of journaling is, besides clearing your mind, just having the record of your life. And so as the legacy educator, which I had mentioned before, one of the things that I've found is that when you can go back and you can look at your life, it's there's such value in that. There's such value in being able to express yourself and then later see where you were at. It also is a great way to keep your memory going. I really do believe that that's one of the real blessings of journaling is when you write something down, it just kind of sits in your mind in a different way. All I can say is that I just would encourage people to journal because I think that if anyone is willing to try it and just get into the habit, I think that it's a habit that's worth keeping. I just believe it's a gift. It's
It
just a
is.
gift.
It is.
Yeah.
I'm so glad I got back to it. And I encourage everyone to do it. And thank you so much for joining me today, Merle. It's been, amazing, fascinating, encouraging, inspiring, and I wish you the best of luck with your second book. And please keep doing what you're doing because you're changing lives.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Of course. And for anyone who's watching or listening, thank you for spending this hour with us. And until we meet again.